And now, School Picture Day. Written by Lynn Plourde. Illustrated by Thor Wickstrom. It was School Picture Day. Everyone was dressed in their best. Bows and bow ties, sashes and suspenders, jewels and jackets. Everyone, that is, except Josephina Carolina Wadashina the First. Josephina didn't know it was School Picture Day. She didn't even know it was Wednesday. She had more important things to think about on the bus ride to school. I wonder how this gear shift works. Squirm, shift, squeal, lift. After some highfalutin fidgeting, fiddling, fuddling, and foopling, Josephina finally figured out how the gear shift worked. Splooch. Meanwhile, everyone wiped the grease off their bows and bow ties, sashes and suspenders, jewels and jackets, as they walked the last 3.5 miles to school. "Hustle, bustle, hurry, scurry," said Mrs. Shepherd as she rushed everyone into her classroom. "You're late, and the photographer will be here any minute to take our class picture. Now please, everyone, fill out the school picture form with your sharpest number 2 pencils. And no fiddling," she added with a glance toward Josephina. Everyone started filling out the forms after sharpening their pencils at Mrs. Shepherd's superfast plush deluxe electric pencil sharpener. Everyone, that is, except Josephina Carolina Wadashina the First. She had more important things to think about. Wiggle, yank, jiggle, crank. I wonder how this pencil sharpener works. After some highfalutin fidgeting, fiddling, fuddling, and foopling, Josephina finally figured out how the pencil sharpener worked. Meanwhile, everyone brushed wood shavings off their bow and bow ties, sashes and suspenders, jewels and jackets, and bun. They finished their brushing just in time. "Here's the photographer," Mrs. Shepherd announced. "Time to line up, you cutesy wootsies." The photographer scurried Mrs. Shepherd and all 23 children in the class into their places. The stand on the chairs row, the stand on the floor row, the sit on the chairs row, and the sit on the floor row. He put Josephina in the stand on the chairs row, then ordered, "Everyone say cheesy wheezy, if you pleasey." "Cheesy wheezy," went 22 children and Mrs. Shepherd. But Josephina had more important things to think about. Josephina lifted up a ceiling tile and muttered, I wonder how this sprinkler system works. Push, shove, poosh, above. After some highfalutin fidgeting, fiddling, fuddling, and foopling, Josephina finally figured out how the sprinkler system worked. Meanwhile, 22 children, Mrs. Shepherd, and the photographer wrung out their bows and bow ties, sashes and suspenders, jewels and jackets, bun and camera. "Hokey dokey, don't be a slowpokey." The photographer lined everyone up in their same exact places, except Josephina. He put her in the sit on the floor row, then coaxed, "Teethy weethies, let's see those teethies." 22 children and Mrs. Shepherd showed their teethies. But Josephina had more important things to think about. pry, creak, rattle, peak. Josephina lifted up a floor vent and muttered, I wonder how this heating system works. After some highfalutin fidgeting, fiddling, fuddling, and foopling, Josephina finally figured out how the heating system worked. Meanwhile, 22 children, Mrs. Shepherd, and the photographer stomped the soot off their bows and bow ties, sashes and suspenders, jewels and jackets, bun and camera. One more time, you sweetie pies, just watch my little birdie. The photographer got out his special wind-up, flashing, squawking, talking bird and lined everyone up, back in the same exact places, except Josephina. He put her in the sit-on-the-chairs row, then begged, Birdie wants a cheesy cheesy. Missy wants a cheesy cheesy too. Cheesy cheesy, cheesy cheesy, went 22 children and Mrs. Shepherd. But Josephina had more important things to think about. Squawk! Howdy! What's up? Josephina sat in her chair, muttering, I wonder what makes this special wind-up, flashing, squawking, talking bird work. Fluff, poof, crank, kerzoff. After some highfalutin fidgeting, fiddling, fuddling, and foopling, Josephina finally figured out how the special wind-up, flashing, squawking, talking bird worked. Meanwhile, 22 children, Mrs. Shepherd, and the photographer plucked feathers off their bows and bow ties, sashes and suspenders, jewels and jackets, bun and camera. Freeze! I said freeze! The photographer yelled so loud, everyone could see all the way down to his toe bones. This time, Mrs. Shepherd and the 23 children froze. No cheesies, no teethies, but they were all looking at the camera. The photographer hurried to push the button. Ah! Screamed the photographer. My camera doesn't work. Then fix it, said 22 children. I don't know how to fix it. I don't know how it works. All I do is push the button. You can't fix it? Gasped Mrs. Shepherd. We won't have our school picture taken? 22 children sobbed. Nosy wosy. The photographer shook his head. Tweezle, shimmy, putter, queasel. Josephina held the camera, muttering, I wonder how this camera works. After some highfalutin fidgeting, fiddling, fuddling, and foopling, Josephina finally figured out how the camera worked. It works, said Josephina. Nice fiddling, Mrs. Shepherd smiled. Sweetie, munchkin, pumpkin pie, show me, begged the photographer. Okay, said Josephina. She lined everyone up, back in their same exact places, except the photographer. She put him in the lie-on-the-floor row. Then she pushed the time delay button on the camera, ran to her place, and simply said, Smile. 23 children, Mrs. Shepherd, and the photographer all smiled. Several weeks later, the school pictures arrived. Mrs. Shepherd asked Josephina to hand them out. Josephina had more important things to think about, like her new spaceship science project, but she passed them out anyway. Everyone was pretty pleased, but all the parents did wonder, who was that new big kid in Mrs. Shepherd's class? Cheesy Wheezy.